Everybody can see that, right?
Yep.
Okay. So first, thanks for having me tonight. You know, I've been fly fishing now for about 6 months. Everything I do prior to this is with bait. I like drowning worms and corn, but so I'm really surprised that you guys invited me tonight, being that I have 6 months experience fly. I took my lessons when I started fly fishing 7 months ago from Ed Landry. So that's who taught me how to fly fish. No, I'm kidding. So um, you know, I've been fly fishing for since probably late 80s, 90, 89, 90, 91, right in there is when I started. And from my accent, I know you think I sound like Ed, but thank God I don't. I'm actually from New York rather than New England. And so, you know, I cut my teeth growing up on saltwater stripers for a lot of years. And I moved down to Georgia back in 97. And long story short, they have landlocks down there. And that was one of the reasons I needed to move for my full-time job. And long story short, by the year 2000, the Fishhawk Fly Shop, which is one of the bigger fly shops east of the Mississippi, had kind of asked me to start guiding folks on Lake Lanier. And I really didn't want to do it, but I eventually caved in and took 6 people, and then the next year 12, and then the next year 15. And I have a full-time job just like everybody else does, and I'm doing probably somewhere around 50 trips a year along with a full-time job. Just that my gig allows me to get out on the water probably close to between 175 and 200 days a year. I can work, you know, from the cell phone out of my boat. So I'm very blessed in that respect. But what's really interesting was when I came down to Georgia, nobody was fly fishing for stripers on the lake. And all I did was take my knowledge of fishing New York and Connecticut and New England, and brought that down there. And I will tell you that the minute I got out, the first 6 months, from having fished for stripers for the previous 20 years, I brought that knowledge down to Lake Sidney Lanier, which is landlocked, a man-made lake. And I didn't catch a fish for 6 months. I'm telling you guys, I went out 2, 3, 4 days a week, and I didn't catch a fish for 6 months. And I kind of had to figure out and relearn everything that I thought I knew about these fish, because they are the same fish that we see in the salt that are coming up from, you know, that are in Chesapeake Bay and whatnot. The only difference is they're landlocked. So with that being said, we're going to talk about for sodium-free stripers, and this is fishing either in landlocked lakes or in river systems. And while some of the tactics we're going to talk about tonight cover fishing like the way Robert was saying, he's fishing the James, but that's coming up from the salt. These are fish that are nowhere near the salt. The fish I'm talking about can't get to the salt. These are fish that are literally landlocked. And basically, the picture of above of my lake, it's basically 550 square miles, almost 600 miles of shoreline. And up in the North Georgia mountains over by the Blue Ridge, that's the Blue Ridge Mountains in the foreground. So that's where I do fishing. And just to give you an idea, to show you that these fish are not really much different, the ones you guys are accustomed to in the salt, I'll just show you a quick 30-second clip. So this was in the end of October a couple of years ago, and I learned a lesson a long time ago that stripers don't know where they live, and it's the truth. These fish act just like the saltwater fish that you're accustomed to. The only difference is when they're not doing this, when they're not doing that on the top, they become a little trickier to find because we don't have tides in the lake to help us find the fish. But one of the nice things about sodium-free stripers, as I like to call it, is look how the boat doesn't rock, guys. I mean, it is flat calm. So I know we don't have any old timers in this club. Everybody is under 90. So, but you can see how easy it is on the legs for everybody. It's kind of how they start out. Fish either produce on their own, or our Department of Natural Resources or Wildlife, Fish and Wildlife, can actually stock. They have striper hatcheries in all these states, and they will, wherever there's not a natural reproduction, they'll actually stock these things at 1 inch long. And basically, these fish, we don't see them for the first couple of years right after they get put in at that size. And then all of a sudden, at about 2-3 years later, they show up at about 3 pounds. And then after that, every year, they're putting on 3 to 4 pounds a year. So a 5-year-old fish is going to look something like probably 10 pounds. And eventually, start to see the bait, the stripers grow little by little. One day, look like that. So we get some doggone big size fish on our on our lake. And by the way, my lake, the fish don't naturally reproduce. In order for excuse me, in order for the fish to be able to reproduce, the river systems have to be long enough for the fish to make their spawning run every spring, just like they do everywhere else in the country on the seaboard. Like you get that Roanoke River run of saltwater stripers that run upriver. Well, our stripers that are landlocked, they run up our river systems too. They lay their eggs, but if the river systems aren't long enough, the eggs don't hatch into a fry. The eggs just tumble all the way down back into the lake, get covered up with silt, and that's why we have our Department of Natural Resources stocking them. In order to find and then catch the fish, you have to find their food source. And that's really the whole key to striper fishing in rivers and in lakes. Is it's different from salt because you have tides. And tides allow you to find areas, structure, that the bait like to hang out at, and that the fish will come by and eat after a certain time. Well, on lakes, we have structure, but we don't have tides. So why a fish or a bunch of fish may be in one area for 3 or 4 days and nothing has changed, and then all of a sudden they're not there anymore? That's the big mystery. There, what you're looking at is a threadfin shad, and you're going to find that that's the one common denominator in probably 90% of the lakes in the United States that have striped bass. And by the way, stripers are in 38 states across the United States. So out of our 48 48 continental, they're in 38 states of that 48. So we get them in a lot of places. We also get hybrids, which are similar to a striper. They're not quite as big, and they're a combination excuse me, between a striped bass and a white bass. But one of the big common denominators is the threadfin shad. You can see they can be absolutely tiny. And what's really interesting is they can go up from about a half an inch up to about 5 inches in length. But when they're on that super small bait, they are hard as heck to get to eat a fly. I once asked Lefty Cray what's the hardest fish in all his life that he's ever had to feed on a fly, and Lefty said, he didn't even hesitate. He said stripers, when they're on itty bitty bait, they're tougher than nails to get to eat. So, and that's because they're eating these little young of the year threadfin shad. They kind of look like a. We also have or alewives or all sorts of herring type fish in lakes across the United States. These are blueback herring that are in my lake, and they look similar to an Atlantic herring. Finally, we have gizzard shad. Gizzard shad are in many of the lakes, and especially the river systems. You go into a landlocked river system, the likelihood is your fish are going to be eating gizzard shad. And they are a herring as well, but they have that sort of Menhaden bunker kind of look to them, if you notice. And they can get up to around 14, 15 inches in length. So they're very similar to a bunker in fresh water. What is the most important thing? If you guys are going to go stalk stripers in some of your, Virginia impoundments away from the shore, water temperature is the single most important factor in determining where you're going to find the bait. Is the bait going to be on the beach? Is the bait going to be on the rocks? Is it going to be in the backs of the creeks? Is it going to be in the river channel? Is it going to be on humps? Is it going to be in ledges, deep off the ledges? Bait moves around, and where the bait will be at any one time is all based on water temperature. So the key in learning where to find the bait, which in turn will help you find the stripers, is learning what the patterns are, where the bait's going to be at certain times of the year. And those patterns are all dictated by water temperature of the lake. You can see, is the bait shallow? Is it deep over the river channel, in the back of the cove, on the point, on the humps, in the mouths of the creeks? It's around hard structure. And here you can see the bait was under our dock, one of these multiple docks the threadfin shad got there. One of the things that will help you find the bait, bird life. I can't tell you how important it is to have animal life, the wildlife, give you the clue to where the fish are going to be. Despite for thinking he's the best fisherman on most lakes, I know Robert Thomas thinks he's one of the best, but the truth is that greater blue heron right there is one of the best. That's the best angler on any lake. And I want you to notice, guys, do you see that heron sitting on the bank? Do you see his neck? You see how his neck is tucked into his body? When you see a heron on a point or on the land and his neck is tucked into his body, he's basically resting. I don't even worry about fishing anywhere near herons when they're in that posture. When I see a heron doing this, his neck extended, that means that heron is hunting. And if I'm driving down my lake doing 40 miles an hour and I look to my right and there's a heron on a point and his neck is like that, I will do a U-turn and stop and fish that point. Also have on many of our lakes, we get loons in the fall. They come in about November and leave by April. And a loon is just exactly what you'd think you'd see up in Minnesota or Wisconsin. These things can dive underwater and they're carnivores and they eat shad. And I can't tell you how many times I have found stripers and loons working together on a ball of bait. It's like something you would see out of National Geographic. Fishers are another bird. You see, they kind of look like a woodpecker. You'll find them in the backs of coves, and they're making a lot of noise. You'll hear them squawking the whole time back there. And if you find kingfishers diving on the water, you know you found a good source of bait. It's a good place to look for stripers. Finally, easiest and probably the most fun bird to look for are the gulls and the terns. Just like in saltwater, when you see them huddled together or in on a beach area, you know that they found a big old school of bait. So we use bird life to help find the stripers when the stripers aren't feeding on top like what you saw in that earlier video. Right there, guys, you can see that shadow right up on the shoreline is a school of threadfin shad. So they can get awfully shallow or they can stay, offshore in deep water over 100 feet deep. So it's really important to try and find the bait when you want to try and find the fish. Another thing to look for is a freshwater course that comes into your lake. You can see in the back of this cove, or what I call a pocket, you can see the fresh water running in. That means that water back in that pocket is highly oxygenated, and bait fish love to get into the backs of these highly oxygenated areas on a lake. Matter of fact, I made a couple of casts into that. What I caught, I actually caught a threadfin on my fly. I want to let you know, there is absolutely no doubt in my mind that Ed Landry would consider that one caught fish right there. That would be one in the bucket for Ed. And that's how he counts fish. This is also a good sign that the bait is around. We see fish splashing on top like that. And we see that all the time. But they're, stripers can be secretive, just like they are in the salt. They don't always show themselves. Everything comes together to have it. It all works out. It all comes together, and we can hook up on the lakes. You can see right there. There's one of our freshwater stripers. And our fish average.
It looks like the one I just caught.
I'm sorry?
It looks a lot like the one I just caught.
It could be. Maybe it's the same one. Maybe he took a trip south. But this fish, our fish average anywhere from 5 to 10 pounds, and we can get them up to 20, 25 pounds. And some lakes, depending on where you're located, I personally think the best striper fishing landlocked in the country is probably in Tennessee and in Kentucky. That's some of your best striper fishing in the country. They just have unbelievable water quality there, and the fish can grow up to 50, 60 pounds. So this is one of my favorite things to do. This is what we call fishing a dock light. If you guys look in front of that dock, that big green light that's underwater, how many guys have ever fished the Chesapeake Bay Bridge tunnel, the lights coming off the bridge? Anybody? Let me see a show of hands, even though I only see 4 people. Thanks, Robert. So what happens is, on these underwater lights, you can make yourself basically a ecosystem. The light actually attracts the plankton. That's what that light attracts. It attracts plankton, zooplankton. The zooplankton attracts the threadfin shad because that's what they eat. The threadfin shad attracts the stripers because that's what they eat. And then we get attracted by the stripers. So you got this whole ecosystem going on that's created by a light. And guys, if you haven't done it for stripers up by you, some of you may have done it down in Florida fishing dock lights for snook. It's very, very similar. The only difference is snook can be boogers trying to eat a fly off of a light in Florida, where stripers are so easy. It's like as Lefty used to say, it's like rolling a wine bottle in a jail cell. I mean, that's how easy stripers can be when you're fishing a dock light. And I want to show you guys again. Sure, some of you believe in the old adage that you can't put a banana in the boat because it's bad luck. Well, we actually killed that idea with striper fishing on a dock light, and I want to show you what happened. You can see the banana peel rolled up the fly line, up the leader.
Oh, man.
So you can see bananas are good luck. So anyway, that's how easy stripers can be on dock lights, guys. You may go make your new fly. That could be a new pattern for you. Um, so anyway, when we're not dock light fishing, you can see right there, that's a sandy beach point. Sandy points are really good in the springtime for stripers. Rocky points are really good as well, especially in the month of May when the shad and the bait fish are spawning, because when bait fish spawn in lakes, they have to spawn on rocks because they have to go up to the rocks in shallow water at first light, kick their tail against the rock so that when they lay their eggs, they stick to something. So they do that usually on rocky points. Clay points are another great place to look for fish, and that's just a red clay bank that we have by us. I love fishing red clay. This is what it looks like, guys, when they're out over open water. You see a flock of birds come in just like you would in the salt, and you want to get close to them with a trolling motor. You don't want to throw your big motor on these fish. You really want to get to use your trolling motor and not get right on top of them, because these fish in a still water environment can be really spooky. You don't have tides and current, so they feel everything. So you got to stay off the way this guy in that boat stayed off. But I want you to notice something, folks. You notice the bank there in front of that red clay point in front of us. What that is what we call a long tapered point. So if you were to walk in the water from that bank, if you took 3 steps in, you'd be in 2 feet. If you took 10 steps in, you'd be in 8 feet. If you took 20 steps in, you'd be in 15 feet. And if you took 30, 35 steps in, you would drop off to 40 feet. And what's important about that, see right here on this screenshot, we were on that long tapered point, and at 16 feet, that's where the bottom dropped out. And if you look just on the bottom of the screen there, you'll see the stripers, and they're just laying in wait there until that bait comes off that point, and that's when they attack. So that structure of tapered points is really important in freshwater striper fishing. When you see the birds flying low to the water, that means the birds are on bait that's up near the surface. You see the birds flying high in the air, that means they see bait deep, 20, 30 feet down. So that's why I keep telling you, the posture of the wildlife can give away a lot of information on landlocked stripers. What it looks like on your depth finder, a mass, that, excuse me, that big mass, that's bait, that's not stripers. That's all bait fish huddled up at between 12 and 16 feet. If you find the bait, find the fish. What it looks like when you find the stripers on the graph. And you can see we were in 37 feet of water and the fish were all between 20 and 30 feet down. So in this case, a fast sinking line would be the fly line of choice to catch these fish. Pittsburgh Steelers fans can catch stripers on landlocked, in landlocked lakes. So this is really an interesting clip here, guys. So if you look at the gentleman standing on the shoreline, just out from him is one fish. You can see the boil just out to his left, probably 15 feet off the bank. But then if you go out about 100 feet, 120 feet, you can see 4, 5, 6 splashes in the middle. Most people would say, let's go after the fish out in the middle. Well, I'm here to tell you that it's the fish that are running the shoreline that are the easy fish to catch. Not that you shouldn't fish for those fish out in the middle, but those fish out in the middle may be in 40 feet of water, coming up and eating and then going back down, where the fish that's cruising the shoreline has committed himself to eating shallow. So it's always better to go after fish that are up shallow. You see this, see a fish blow up, you have to fish with a sense of urgency. I can't tell you how many times I have 2 anglers in my boat, I put them up broadside to a fish or 2 or 10 or whatever, and nobody's casting. they're all sitting there with their mouth open going, wow, look at that. Isn't that something? And I'm like, somebody's got to please cast. You don't have a lot of time out over open water because these fish will be down in 20 feet again in a matter of seconds. So fishing with a sense of urgency is really important. That's what it takes to be successful. Again, you notice the gulls, they're all flying low to the water. And that's what gave me the sense to know that there was a lot of bait over there high to the surface. And sure enough, I was able to nail the fish right out of that. There's no giveaway other than the birds flying low to the water. Again, this is what, when I pulled up to those fish, this is what I saw. I just saw I was in 23 feet of water and I had fish from 10 feet to the bottom. And so that's kind of what I was seeing underwater. And having a good fish finder is a must when you're freshwater striper fishing. So quickly just show you what our year in review would look like on Lake Lanier. And I'm not going to talk a whole lot through this. I'm just going to tell you what month it is as we go through each piece here. So that's November. That's when we have our rut. And the deer, the males, that buck is chasing a female 100 feet in front of him. This was October. That was a poor cast. This was in November as well. And guys, this was either end of October or early November. This was early December. This was in January. This was in October. That was end of January. That was sometime in the winter. That was the fall. That was the spring. That was March. That's just a daggum lot of fish. So guys, really what I want to show you that fish typically can be caught from around October straight through till May. And then the water just gets too warm and these fish go deep for the summer for, June, July, August, and then they fire back up a little bit in September. but October through the end of April is really some of our best fishing. And you'll find the same thing will happen, by you guys as well in Virginia. So the reason I'm showing you this is any kind of boat on a freshwater lake will work. There's a lot of center consoles now. A lot of the striper guys are all using center consoles. Boats will work really well. If somebody has a bass boat on a lake, there's no problem with fly fishing out of a bass boat. We see a ton of guys fishing out of flats boats these days. They're obviously really good in salt and extremely good on the lakes as well. Micro skiffs, nothing wrong with a little John boat. And if you don't believe me, ask Robert, he'll tell you. John boats work beautiful. I love fishing out of. And oh, by the way, I brought a picture of Ed's boat. Do you guys familiar with Ed's boat? Well, I'm going to show it to you in a minute. Pull out a jet ski, and that is not Ed's boat. It's Ed's boat, right there. That's what Ed fishes out of when he goes striper fishing.
You found me.
I'm fishing out of a 22-foot Ranger. Light is obviously, just like in the salt, low light is the best time to fish. So whether it's, sunrise is great. Happens to be a picture of Dan Blanton right there. And sunset can be just magical outside. Low light is certainly your best times to fish, just like you would for any largemouth bass or smallmouth bass. They just feed really well on low light. You can wade fish for these things. You can definitely wade fish lakes if you know where to go. We always practice catch and release. Let's talk about the seasons really quickly. Springtime is when we get our biggest fish of the year, and you'll find that on any lake in the United States. When the fish get to pre-spawn, that's when we get the big girls. Spring is also the best time on my lake for trophy spotted bass. I taught that old guy how to tie flies many, many years ago. Stripers, we have all different sizes, but stripers in the fall are really, really good. For fishing, you go pre-frontal on a snowstorm and you are going to bang it up. I mean, you're going to just put a big catch in the boat if you go pre-frontal when you striper fish. They really turn on right before storms come in. We catch them all winter long. And then obviously, let me show you some quick fly patterns. Hey, first look, it looks like a little Clouser minnow, and it quite frankly is. It's a fly called a something else. It's made out of polar fiber with a little hot pink fluorofiber, and that has been our trademark pattern when they get on that hard-to-eat small threadfin shad. Lefty was amazed by that and thought that was just one of the best fly patterns he's ever seen used for catching stripers in reservoirs when they're on bait that's less than 2 inches long. You can see that's kind of how it matches the threadfin shad beautifully. But it's that hot pink fluorofiber that's the ticket. And you can see it'll catch them. A coyote is a fly that I designed years ago with a little spinner blade on there. It's sort of a road runner for you guys that remember what road runners were when you threw spinning rods. It's a great searching pattern, and we use it with a Colorado blade because it emits a vibration. It's very little flash on that fly. That spinner blade is there to emit vibration, so the stripers can feel the fly in the water. Fly when you're fishing on top is a very good choice. Clouser minnow it's obviously the American Express card of flies. You don't leave home without it. A bait fish pattern, any sort of a fish style pattern is very, very productive on our lakes, especially when they're on bigger bait like the bigger shad or the bigger herring type bait. You want to have a whole lot of fun. This is one of the most fun flies to fish, is a wiggle minnow. And it comes in like a Rapala. That when you put that rod under your arms and do a hand over hand retrieve, that thing just wiggles left and right, and it's just a blast to fish. My favorite topwater fly, whether you're fishing salt or freshwater, is a pole dancer. I will tell you, I've caught stripers in both lakes and saltwater environments with this fly, and I will tell you, striper eats a pole dancer, the most vicious strike you've ever seen. they don't want to eat it, they want to crush it. As far as new patterns, Blaine Chocolate's Game Changer is a fantastic fly that I would highly recommend. Story behind this fish right here. I just had two friends fishing a point that I had told them about, and I came down in my boat and they were leaving, and I stopped and put my trolling motor down, and they said, we just fished this point for the last 15 minutes. It's dead. And on my second cast, I hooked that fish on a Game Changer. The next day, they went out and each bought a half dozen Game Changers. And my Donald Trump popper. I'm very proud of this fly. This fly will start an entire striper insurrection on the surface. So that's my Donald Trump popper. Key is the retrieve. The retrieve is the most important thing you know about fishing with stripers. Retrieve is a very short strip, no more than 6 inches in length, 3 or 4 followed by a pause. You have got to pause the fly when you're striper fishing. I don't care if you're fishing freshwater or saltwater. When it comes to stripers, they eat on the pause 90% of the time. And when I say a 2-3 second pause, I mean you need to count Mississippis, when you're pausing, because that's when they eat. When you go to hook fish, you need to do a hook, a strip strike. So you can't trout set these fish or you'll pull the fly away from them. Got to be a strip strike like you see right here. Just remember, if at first you don't succeed, doing what your guide told you to do in the first place. So that's the key, is paying attention, fishing with urgency, the right kind of a strip, and making sure that you haven't had a banana. No, I'm kidding. You could eat a banana. Let's talk about the bare necessities you need. You need a rod, reel, line, leader, flies. If you're fishing for stripers in a lake, you need a fish finder, you need binoculars, you got to have an electric trolling motor, or you need a friend who has a boat. You need one of those things to make this all happen. Or any rod from 7 to 10 weight will work. Reels need to just hold 150 yards of backing and have a good drag system. Lines, I fish mostly intermediate, slow sinking, cold water fly lines, or I'm fishing fast sinking cold water fly lines. That's what I'm fishing most of the time. The only time I'm fishing a floating line is basically in the month of May when I can get them to eat on the surface, or in the month of September and early October when I can get them to eat on the surface. Other than that, I'm always fishing subsurface. I don't care if you see 100 fish on the top in November. If they're on top busting the bait up on the surface and you throw a popper or a crease fly or a gurgler or a pole dancer, you're not going to get an eat. You gotta be subsurface from basically the end of October till the end of April. They will not eat on the top. My favorite line to throw is an 8-weight intermediate, but it's what we call an FI. It's a floating intermediate. So rather than throwing a fly line that the whole 100 feet, the whole 100 feet of fly line is intermediate, slow sinking, I like the fly line where the 70 feet in the back is all floating and the front 30 feet is intermediate, slow sink. And the reason I like that is because they move so fast. Sometimes you make a cast to where you think you saw the fish, and the next minute they were at 9 o'clock, and the next thing you know, they're in front of the boat at 12 o'clock. And an FI fly line allows you to pick that fly up and recast much more quickly. As far as leader setup goes, I'm a believer in fluorocarbon. Some guys aren't. I feel confident in fluorocarbon. What you really want to use, I'm mostly a 7-foot long, 16-pound test guy, unless I'm fishing over trees or I'm fishing a dock light. If I'm fishing a dock light or I'm over trees, then I fish a 7-foot, 20-pound tippet leader. Because in a dock light situation, if you hook a fish and he's 12, 15 pounds, he's going to run right back to the light and try and do loop-de-loops around the cord. And you've got to be able to pull that fish away. So in certain situations, I go with 20, and in certain situations, I go with 16. Casting bubble and a fly. If you bring an angler in the boat that's not a fly fisherman and they're eating little baits, you can give them a spinning rod. And if you look in this angler's left hand, just below the line is a clear casting bubble with water in it. What we do is that casting bubble gives that spinning rod the weight to throw the fly. And then you can just pull that in slowly and let it sit, and pull it and let it sit, and pull it and let it sit. And that's the way you can get somebody conventionally fishing a fly using spinning tackle. Binoculars are a must-have because you just, when there's no birds on the lake, you can't see those splashes as far away as you'd like to think you can. You might have been able to when you were 40, but once you're above 50, those eyes just don't work as good. So binocs are really, really important. An electric trolling motor, you can see that motor on the front of my boat. You cannot approach these fish with a big engine. They won't let you. It's just they're too spooky in a still water environment. So an electric trolling motor is a must-have. You also need to have a good fish finder that'll show you the fish underwater in case the fish aren't on top or in case the birds aren't around. You know, it's not always that it's going to be a perfect situation. A lot of times you got to go hunt for fish. And, interesting about this picture, guys, is this, and I'm not going to get too into detail. Suffice it to say that in the middle of this picture, you can see that medium blue. That's the river channel in my lake. That light blue all around it, that's just other water around the lake. That's deep water. You can see it says 39 feet, 41 feet, 45 feet. But in that river channel, you can see it says, whatever that says, 83 or 63 feet. My Humminbird fish finder has something on there called contour highlighting. It allows me to put a range in my fish finder that I will say, I want to know where the high spots on the lake are that are 20 to 25 feet, and they will show up in green. So if you look where that middle of that white dot is in the middle, to the left of that, you're in 80 feet of water or 60 feet of water in there, and just to the left, unbeknownst to you, is a very high spot. But you wouldn't know that unless you read your excuse me, unless you read your chart. If you read your chart, you'd have to look at the chart and see where are the humps. Humps are unbelievable structures on lakes to find fish. Fish tend to set up, whether they're stripers, smallmouth, largemouth, they all set up on humps. And in order to find the humps, you have to read your chart. Well, Humminbird takes that guesswork out and allows you to have every hump on your lake show up in different colors as long as you're fishing a decent sized lake. It's not going to show up in a small lake, but if you have a big lake, it will absolutely show up, and you can, because they have charts for every lake in the country, basically. Really, this is what most lakes generally look like. And this was taken, this little short video clip I thought was pretty funny. A friend of mine who happens to be a fisherman was out on Lake Lanier Island's golf course, and they were tooling around, playing around a golf, and here's what happened. That's in October. All that nervous water is striped bass. That was actually a golf cart. Yeah, these guys got pretty excited. So that's what happens in the early part of the season. Uh, this is what it looks like after I make my first post on Lake Lanier, that there's, fish that are showing up the very next day. This is what it looks like on my lake. If this is why I'm not a big fan of Instagram anymore. Anyway, what I really, before we end this, and we're getting very close to the end, I want to show you why fishing a freshwater lake for stripers, will have you feeling like you're fishing salt water. And guys, you guys are blessed because you have both. But you know, I'm 300 miles from the coast, so I don't get to fish salt water as much as you guys can. So that was Montauk. Now, of course, nothing on a lake is ever going to mimic Montauk. But I'd still say that looks like it's a lot of fun. Guys, those guys in the foreground, they're in their own school behind us there. Ed, you may want to put your scopolamine patch on because salt water, the boat rocks. Boat doesn't rock in the lake. So I ask you, does this remind you of salt water? It does to me. So this is why I say freshwater environments can offer saltwater, fantastic saltwater-like opportunities, and that's the beauty of being able to fish these freshwater lakes across the country. I'm going to finish up by just talking about really quickly now available at fly shops and Amazon and Books a Million and Barnes and Noble. That's the book that I just came out with, Fly Fishing for Freshwater Striped Bass. The forward is by Dave Whitlock. The book was written 100% because Lefty called me telling me we needed a book. This fishery was becoming so popular over the last 5 years that the industry needed a book. So because of him, we put this thing together. Um, so he's the reason it's out there. Um, and Dave he wrote the forward, and Dave was probably the number one fly fishing pioneer for freshwater stripers, and has been an idol and a hero of mine forever. The guy to Dave's right is my photographer, Josh England, who's been in every major magazine, fly fishing magazine. He's had features, pictured features and whatnot through every one of them. And so I was very fortunate and blessed to have these guys. And just to give you an idea why I think so useful, whether you're a fly fisherman or not, whether you're a striper fisherman or a bass fisherman, is it talks about tactics used to catch fish in reservoirs, in rivers. We talk about where to find fish, what a hump is, what a pocket is, what a long tapered point and a short tapered point and a river chat, everything that freshwater fish do to navigate and find fish to eat is covered in this book. This book happens to be particular to stripers, but if you were a largemouth bass fisherman, this book will give you every bit as much information on how to target these things. You can just see, um, from just a couple of brief things. We talk about moon phases and weather patterns and water temperatures and seasonal patterns and structure that the forage fish use to hide, and it just goes through after piece, how to fish a point, a hump, a saddle, a blow through. These are all things that striper anglers, smallmouth anglers, and largemouth anglers have to deal with. Thank you for having me. I want you to know I hit no traffic getting to Virginia today, and I really appreciate that. And you guys can, I'm going to stop sharing.